Hello, Comp 1 online class. Happy Friday. Hope y'all have a good weekend. Just wanted to provide this video for you. I'm trying to do these at least once a week, maybe a couple times twice a week, just to make sure that we're all on the same page. Thank you for being patient. Got a lot. All of us professors are teaching a lot more classes and have a lot more students this semester. So we are, I think a lot of us are working hard to stay caught up on things. So your Essay 1 grades, I should have those back to y'all by, I want to say at least Tuesday. What I'm going to do is probably grade a couple every day for the next couple of days. I'm using some new technology since this is an online class, so it may it may make things a lot faster, or it may slow things down a little bit, but either way I should have your essays back to you. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to hand them back I'm going to send them to you as I grade them. So if you know someone else in the class and they've gotten their essay back and it's been a day and you haven't gotten yours back, relax, yours is coming. So I just wanted to take care of that. I want to talk briefly about the two articles that I gave you to read, and just talk a little bit about them in a way that will allow you to put together a solid paper. So first, let's start with Why We Crave Horror Movies, and then just go from there. So what I usually do in my physical classes is I create a pro and con chart where I'll write down strengths and weaknesses, and then just kind of put the two things in the same chart. And I'm guessing it's backwards on the camera, but you see how that works. And what I usually do is I like to start with logos, ethos, and pathos. Logos, argument by logic; ethos, argument by credibility; and pathos, argument by emotion. And I tell students to always begin with ethos, argument by credibility, because if you don't trust or don't believe the speaker or writer, then none of the other stuff matters. Right? I mean, it doesn't matter how logical their argument or how emotionally invested you get into their argument, or that they try to make their argument. If you don't believe them or you don't feel like they're credible, then it doesn't matter. So starting with Why We Crave Horror Movies, one of the things I like to talk about with students is King's ethos. Now, ethos has two aspects to it. One is experience, and the other is credentials, like certificates, degrees, things like that. The example I like to use is, let's say, you found out that you had cancer, and there were two doctors who can successfully operate to cure you. One of the doctors has been practicing medicine for 30 years, but maybe went to a lesser med school. Maybe they went to ETSU's med school, which is a good med school, but it's not Harvard. But let's say you had another doctor fresh out of Harvard med school, but they haven't been doing it for very long. Right? So one has experience, and the other has a really, maybe a lot of certification, but maybe not, the experience is there. Well, how do you choose between which one is the which is stronger? Ideally you'd want someone who has the degrees and has the experience, but sometimes you have to choose between one or the other. For example, with Stephen King, he's writing about horror movies. Well, a lot of his books have been made into horror movies, and part of experience is if you can make a living doing it. And he's made a lot of money knowing what horror fans like. So you could argue that one of the strengths of the article is King's experience. So you could argue that he has ethos in that regard. King's experience, again, sorry for the backwards. But you can look at it like, one of the weaknesses of the article is he's not a psychologist. I mean, this article, Why We Crave Horror Movies, is about the human mind. And he doesn't have a degree in psychology, and even if he did, he still wouldn't be a psychologist or psychiatrist. You need more than just that. So you could argue he doesn't have the certification or the paper that to support his argument. So you could say he has the experience but lacks the certification. And so you can put that under weakness, right? And so, and then there's other things too with ethos, like for example, where something is published. Like if you know if you read the article, the part at the beginning, you know that it was originally published in Playboy. Now, Playboy is not a a magazine known for its articles, known for the writing, and that could be problematic for some people because of the type of magazine it is or was. I don't even think the magazine exists anymore. So you could say that the fact that it's in Playboy is a weakness, right? And you could even argue that if you have something psychological to say that's interesting and engaging, you probably don't take it to Playboy magazine, right? So again, that could be a weakness. But if you read the article, King you could argue he's not really trying to provide any deep psychological insights. He's really trying to entertain. I mean, he has jokes in there. He has colorful analogies in his article, and so maybe you could argue that he knows the type of audience that he has, and he writes appropriate for that audience, which is part of good writing or good rhetoric is knowing who your audience is and writing appropriately. And so you can argue that given the content of the article, that Playboy could be a strength as well in terms of again how he analyzes his audience and goes accordingly. So one of the things I try to tell students is that depending on how you look at the text or what assumptions you make, you can have a strength or a weakness in the same category. So those are two things to maybe think about when it comes to ethos and credibility. Let's move on to pathos really fast. One of the things I tell students is anything that incorporates your emotions is going to be pathos. So any sort of storytelling is going to, whether that story is supposed to make you laugh, make you cry, whatever, that's an example of pathos. I mean, here King uses several jokes to try to get the audience maybe not laugh out loud, because even though we'll type LOL, none of us really laugh out loud, but I think you could argue that it makes his article readable or more readable. Like, so for example, if you go to paragraph 8 in this article, King says, if we're all insane, then insanity is a matter of degree. And then he goes, if your insanity leads you to carve up women like Jack the Ripper or the Cleveland Torso Murderer, we clap you away in the funny farm. And then he has in parentheses, but neither of those two amateur night surgeons was ever caught. He he he. Now, is that hilarious funny? No, but he's clearly trying to be humorous in a way that, again, makes you want to keep reading. So you could argue that he provides a nice use of humor. He does it later on, like if you look at the bottom of paragraph 9. He goes, love, friendship, loyalty, kindness, these are all the emotions that we applaud, emotions that have been immortalized in the couples of Hallmark cards and in the verses, I dare not call it poetry of Leonard Nimoy. And that idea of the I dare not call it poetry in parentheses is, again, just a little bit of a joke there if you know who Leonard Nimoy is. The former actor, I guess he died recently, maybe the last 2 years or so. But he played Dr. Spock in the original Star Trek. But he also, like a lot of actors, thought, I'm good at this, so maybe I'm going to be good at this other thing over here. And so he published a book of poems. But King is saying, hey, that's not poetry. It's verse form, but it's not poems. So he's making a little bit of a highbrow joke, and you kind of have to know who Leonard Nimoy is and kind of have a little bit of understanding of that backstory to fully appreciate it. But anyway, when it comes to humor, if it works, maybe you're not rolling on the floor laughing, but if you feel like it makes you like the reader, or I'm sorry, makes you like the writer, or makes you like the text more, then you can argue that King's use of humor is a strength. Right, and again, not all humor is designed to make you laugh. I mean, sometimes as a professor, I will make a couple of jokes that are, good for a teacher, but would be bad for a stand-up comic to make. Not because I expect to have the class rolling, but by making the joke, it kind of lightens the mood and sort of gets things in a certain state. So again, humor isn't always about this off the wall laughter. Okay. One last note on humor. If you look at paragraph 11, King says, we have such sick jokes as the baby joke, and he says, such a joke may surprise a laugh or a grin out of us even as we recoil, a possibility that confirms the thesis. If we share brotherhood of man, then we also share an insanity of man. Okay, now we get the baby joke, and with the pitchforks and everything, and sometimes students say, oh, that offended me. I made it so that I couldn't enjoy the rest of the article, and it really turned me off, which is fine, right? You could argue that King's humor is a weakness. Okay, so you can kind of look at it, and you can look at the same thing in either way, because one of the things about humor, and because anything that makes you laugh is, falls in that pathos category, is that it has to work. It may not necessarily need to make you laugh, but it needs to make you appreciate the text more. And if it doesn't do that, if it fails to do so, then that's problematic there. So again, something to think about. Now, something else too in regards to pathos. If you go to paragraph 10, King talks about hugging your, he says, when as children we hug our rotten little puke of a sister and give her a kiss, all the aunts and uncles smile and cry, isn't he the sweetest little thing? Such coveted treats as chocolate-covered graham crackers often follow. But if we deliberately slam the rotten little puke of a sister's fingers in the door, sanctions follow. Angry remonstrance from parents, aunts, and uncles instead of a chocolate-covered graham cracker, a spanking. Okay, so a lot going on there. But what he's doing is he's creating what we call a commonplace in rhetoric. Now here's the thing. You may not have a sister, but we've all been in a situation as kids, and maybe even as adults, where we've had to apologize when we didn't want to. We've had to sort of conform to the rules of society, as part of the agreement of living around other people, is that you have to follow sort of the rules set forth. So he creates a commonplace, like something where we can identify with, and either say, yeah, because I identify with that, I'm much more willing to further listen to him, or because I don't identify, I'm not going to listen. So you could argue that his use of a commonplace is a strength, or you can look at it as a weakness too. So, all right, one last thing. I know this is a lot, but I want to talk about the logic of the article. So if you look at the first paragraph, King does something really he does something good here. He goes, I think we're all mentally ill. Those of us outside the asylums only hide it a little better, and maybe not all that much better after all. We've all known people who talk to themselves, people who sometimes squinch their faces into horrible grimaces, etc., all the way down to the end of the paragraph. But what he does in that opening paragraph is he lets you know where he stands. He essentially starts with his thesis statement, which is, I think we're all mentally ill. Those of us outside the asylum hide it a little better. And then in his next sentence, he defines what he means by mentally ill, because it can mean different things to different people. And he kind of gives a couple of descriptions. People who talk to themselves, people who sometimes squinch their faces into horrible grimaces, and then people who have some hysterical fear. So he gives us essentially a 3-point definition of what it means in his mind to be mentally ill. Now, here's the thing. That he is consistent within that definition with his whole article. And so if you feel that, that definition works, then you can argue that King does a good job with logic. Like, he does a good job thinking clearly. Okay, so you can argue that he has he defines his terms well, which is a part of logos. I got to know what you mean. Even if I disagree with your definition, if I know what your definition is, I can at least go forward and read your article and understand it. Okay? And so, again, And some of the things that students have pointed out in the past is that King is careful to say hysterical fear of snakes, the dark, the tight place, blah blah blah. And hysterical fear and regular fear may be different things. For example, when I was in junior high, I had a teacher who was really afraid of snakes. We had an exotic pet expert come to our school, and he had a snake. And the teacher was so scared, even though she was not in the room with the snake, even though she just knowing that a snake was in the building cried so much that she had to actually go home. She couldn't teach for the rest of the day. That would be maybe an example of an hysterical fear. Okay, so maybe just being afraid of snakes in itself is a little different than what King is talking about. The reason why I bring this up is, you could definitely argue that King's definition works. Okay, and if you go to paragraph, so he establishes that maybe we're all insane to various degrees. He establishes that in the first paragraph, and then he adds to it. If you go to paragraph 8, he says, if we're all insane, then insanity is a matter of degree. So he takes that original argument of we're all insane, and then he builds on it. And then he kind of has like two sides, right? Like saints and serial killers. And I think he's saying that there's almost like a line, and you get the saints over here, serial killers over here, and we're all on various points of the line. And the closer we are to the serial killer part of the line, the more likely we are to be institutionalized for being mentally ill or something of that nature. So King does a solid job of arguing logically. I mean, so we have that there. Now, here's one of the things though is it's not just enough to argue logically. You also want to be correct. So you could argue that maybe King argues logically, but maybe you reject his definition that we're all mentally ill, and that, or his thesis that we're all mentally ill, and his definition of what it means to be mentally ill is incomplete. Maybe you're saying he has an incomplete definition of what it means to be mentally ill. And if that's the case, the assumption on which he's basing his argument on, if that's wrong, then the rest of the argument is likely to end up wrong as well. And so you could say, hey, the thing with Jack the Ripper wasn't that he made faces when no one was looking or had an hysterical fear, is because he killed people, So you could argue that, hey, maybe King's definition of what it means to be mentally ill is a little off base. So that you could argue easily that he has an incomplete definition. Okay? So if that's the case, even if he argues logically, you can maybe say he has an incorrect conclusion. Because you don't really, what you want to do is you want both. You want to argue correctly in that the points that you make are logically sound. It's called being valid, logically valid. But you also want to be correct. Because if you start with the wrong assumptions, you may think logically and still come up with the wrong conclusion. Like if I started with the assumption that human beings have 4 arms and 3 legs, and I don't see anything like that on Earth, then I could come to the logical conclusion that there are no human beings on Earth. But that's incorrect, right? It's because my assumption of what a human being looks like is incorrect, and so everything else is going to be wrong as well. So you want to start with the correct assumptions and then work from there. And then there's lots of things too that we could talk about in terms of King's argument and logic as well. For example, in paragraph 3, King makes an analogy where he compares horror movies to roller coasters, and I think you could argue that the analogy works, right? Especially when he's saying, hey, it's mostly young people who are into these things, mostly they kind of do the same things. They both make us nervous, and it's we may even be scared, but it's in a safe environment. You can definitely see the parallels between the two. But if you go to paragraph 6, he makes another comparison. He goes, one critic has suggested that if pro football has become the voyeur's version of combat, then the horror film has become the modern version of the public lynching. Now, the first part of that sentence, maybe that works, right? Pro football. I mean, they call themselves gladiators. I mean, the game is played in an arena, just like gladiators used to fight in an arena. So there are parallels there. The horror film as the modern version of the public lynching, you could argue either way with that. I mean, you could say that for centuries, what people would do, like a public execution, was a form of entertainment, whether you were chopping off someone's head or hanging them. I mean, as recently in the 1960s in America, that was something that was common enough that you could, get postcards with the pictures of a lynched body on them. So this idea of the horror movie and the public lynching, King does have a point there. Now, if you want to, work on that analogy, you could argue he uses strong analogies, strong comparisons. An analogy is just a type of example. Now, can you look at it in a different way? Could you say that, wait a minute, and if I watch a horror movie and someone dies, that actor is alive to be in another movie. So I'm not actually watching someone dying. That, in a public lynching or any sort of public execution, that person's not coming back. Whereas that actor in the film I'm watching could come back. So you could maybe argue that his analogy is weak. Maybe that, again, it just depends on how you want to look at it. And just like with a lot of the things that we're doing, you see that you can put it, on either side of the argument there. But King, I think he has things about his article that can go either way depending on how you want to present your argument. And I've had students write solid essays arguing that it's well done, and I've had students write solid essays arguing that it's poorly done. So either way is fine with me. Something else I want you to keep in mind is write assuming that I've read the article. So you don't necessarily need to provide too much of a summary. Just provide your analysis of the article. So, all right, this video is getting a little bit long, or at least it feels that way. So what I'm going to do is put the video for Vanity Thy Name is Metrosexual on a different on a different recording, just to kind of provide a little bit of a break. So. If I can figure out how to get this to stop recording.